She's not your daughter. The words crashed like a thunderclap against Gwen's ears, reverberating in the courtroom and ricocheting inside her brain. Time was suspended. The smooth wooden floor that was beneath her felt insecure, as if it was poised to shatter open at any moment and pull her under. Her knees trembled as if they couldn't handle the weight of this information. Gwen clutched the edge of the bench, fingernails burying themselves into the smooth wood, needing something concrete, something solid to cling to. The attorney, a severe-looking woman with sharp movements and expressionless eyes, raised a sealed DNA report, the type of information that makes or breaks lives in an instant. "The findings are definite," she announced, her tone calm but laced with the weight of the moment. Gwen's sight swirled as she attempted to grasp the words. Not her father? How is it possible? Her mind instantly flashed back to all her memories of Kody, the man she had known as Dad her whole life. The man who rode bikes with her, who cheered most at school plays, who sat with her through storms when she was too scared to sleep. Was all that a lie? The idea cut her up like pieces of glass. Gwen's eyes flew to Kody, looking for any sign, any look that could give comfort or answer. But his face was as white as chalk, set in a hard, frozen mask, like a sculpture made from guilt and terror. His lips were barely moving, but no words emerged. Gwen's own chest constricted, her breath effortful, as though the air around them had grown thick with treachery. She needed to shout, to ask questions, but no sound would emerge. The courtroom around her distorted and faded. Whispers began softly at first, half-understood gasps of incredulity, then escalated to a roar, spreading throughout the room like wildfire. Supporters who had come to stand by her shifted nervously in seats. Relatives averted eyes, unable to bear the pain etched clearly on Gwen's face. Even the strangers, those who had only attended to see what would happen, could sense the charged atmosphere. The anticipation was as stifling as the confession had been. Gwen's thoughts whirled, trying to take in a lifetime of memories within the span of seconds. Birthdays, when Kody had assisted her in extinguishing the candles with that proud grin that had always made her feel the center of the universe. Family holidays, the sound of laughter ringing down hotel corridors, car journeys with the music turned up, games played late at night, all of it, all memory now tinged with uncertainty. Had she imagined it all? Had she been living someone else's story? She recalled her first childhood phobias, the nights she had cried herself to sleep, grasping her blanket and feeling the reassuring pressure of Kody's hand on her shoulder. The endless nights he'd spent with her, whispering softly until she drifted off to sleep. Those times had been the center of her universe, and now the center seemed to have collapsed into dust. Her mind turned to Christine, her mother, whose face had paled and tightened as the courtroom drama played out. Gwen's heart wrenched at the sight, not with fury, but with the jagged knot of love, deceit and bewilderment. Christine had always been her shield, the one who attempted to buffer her from life's worst blows. But this was too large, too devastating even for a mother's courage. Gwen's eyes started to burn with unshed tears. She blinked hard, struggling to keep them back, but the fight was lost. Tears would spill, running down her face and scorching the skin as they went. She felt vulnerable, like the whole world would be able to witness the unfiltered, raw heartache written all over her face. Her chest constricted with an odd mix of sorrow and incredulity. Was it possible? Had she believed it all these years? Was everything she had thought a deception? Was it possible that Kody, the man she had loved and trusted without condition, could have withheld such an enormity from her all these years? The questions whirled through her brain, one greater than the next. She felt as if she was sinking in a tempest of confusion, betrayal and grief. The attorney went on, describing the DNA findings, but for Gwen she hardly heard. All she could think about was the devastating discovery, the realization that a key piece of her existence, the man who had been her support system, may not be what she imagined. Her heart racing in her chest, adrenaline and fear ran through her system. She attempted to center herself by glancing around the courtroom, trying to establish some hold in the familiar faces. but they all regarded her differently now. Some in pity, others in curiosity, and a few in unspoken judgment. The world seemed utterly foreign, and Gwen felt a sinking sensation in her heart that things would never be the same anymore. Memories she had held for so long now seemed like pieces of a story written by someone else. Each laugh, each tear, each "I love you" whispered by Kody, now held a different significance, a shadow of uncertainty that threatened to engulf them. How was she supposed to unite the love that she had experienced with the betrayal she now knew may be present? She shut her eyes for an instant, and the courtroom receded into blackness behind the eyelids. The only thing she could hear was the rhythmic thumping of her own heart, booming in her ears like an unforgiving drum of despair. Every beat seemed to whisper the harsh truth. Things would never be the same. And yet, in that instant, in that moment of dread silence, a spark of determination flared. Gwen knew she couldn't sink to despair. She must know the whole truth, no matter what. She must confront the truth of her family, of her father, of herself, even if it shattered her in the process. As she blinked her eyes open, the court gradually refocused around her. The whispers, the darting glances, the tension, all real, yet Gwen did know this. Her life was changed forever in that moment. The truth had flashed like lightning, and her world was bathed in a cold, blinding light. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew there was no going back. Her own hands, which still clung to the edge of the bench, quivered violently now. Tears flowed unchecked down her face as she muttered softly under her breath, hardly audible, "How could this happen?" The courtroom waited with bated breath. Gwen Brown, her father's daughter who had trusted her father's love blindly, now stood at the threshold of a truth that would reshape her life for all eternity. And in the silence, heavy with unspoken emotions, she understood that nothing, no family, no memory, no comfort, would ever be the same again. The courtroom closed in on Gwen, the walls caving in as the burden of the truth weighed down on her chest. All eyes were now on her, watching for a response, for some sort of reaction to the life-changing news she had just received. She was hovering on the brink of a cliff, the ground beneath her giving way, not knowing if she would tumble or make it. Christine moved forward, her words shaking but soft. "Gwen, I never wanted you to know in this way," she murmured, laying a trembling hand on the shoulder of her daughter. Gwen could sense the heat of her mother's hand, but it brought scant comfort. It rather set off a whirlwind of confusion and pain. How long had the secret been hidden? How many years had gone by while the world she believed existed had been kept hidden from her with such meticulous care? Gwen looked at her mother, her eyes shining with tears. "Why?" she asked softly, hardly able to force the word out. She let out a broken crack of sound in the silence of the courtroom. "Why did you make me believe he was my father growing up? Why not just tell me the truth?" The anguish in the words was fierce, raw, and impossible to deny. Christine's head dropped, guilt graven deep into her face. "I thought I was keeping you safe," she whispered. "I wanted you to have a father, to be loved and protected. I didn't think it would hurt this much ultimately." Her voice cracked, and she looked at Kody, who sat paralyzed, his hands locked firmly together. Gwen's eyes jerked to Kody. "You?" she screamed, the rage building like a wildfire within her. "You knew? You've known all along. And you didn't warn me? How could you sit there and let me hold on to a falsehood?" Her words rang out off the walls of the courtroom, mingling disbelief, pain, and rage. Kody's mouth opened, and for the first time he attempted to say something, but words became stuck in his throat. He glanced at Gwen, anguish crossing his face, but he could not get the right words out to reverse the hurt. Each passing second seemed to last an eternity, like a lifetime of unasked questions and destroyed trust. Gwen had tears running freely down her own face now. Her heart hurt with a mix of betrayal and grief. All the memories she had cherished, birthdays, holidays, late-night conversations, and family trips, were now contaminated with distrust. Each memory she had cherished with love and pride now seemed like a cruel joke, a tale that was never truly hers to call her own. The courtroom remained still, save for the soft sniffles of Gwen and the occasional shifting of the judge's feet. Even the judge sort of leaned forward, aware of the gravity of the moment. but not wanting to intrude upon the raw emotion-filled confrontation. Gwen's voice trembled as she went on. I trusted you. I loved you, Kody. I believed in you. And now I don't know anything. I don't know what is real anymore. Christine attempted to reach out once more, but Gwen reacted instinctively and stepped back. Don't touch me. Not yet. I need to breathe, to comprehend how my world just turned around. Gwen replied, speaking in a throaty voice filled with emotion. She was experiencing a maelstrom of conflicting emotions: love, hate, confusion, anger, and deep, heart-wrenching sadness. Kody's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time in the courtroom, he was vulnerable, stripped of his usual poise. Gwen, I am so sorry, he said softly, his words barely heard above the tension in the room. I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to love you the best way I knew how. Gwen shook her head in disbelief, wiping her tears furiously with the back of her hand. Love? How can there be love when it is based on lies? How can I believe anything you say from here on? Her words sliced through the courtroom, a stinging reminder of the extent of the betrayal she felt. Christine wept openly now. I did what I believed was best. Gwen, I never wanted to see you hurt, never wanted to see you doubt who you were. I made a mistake, a terrible one, but it was always for love, she stated, her voice breaking under the pressure of her admission. Gwen could feel her rage burning in tandem with her sorrow. She ached to scream, to throw objects, to lash out at both Kody and Christine, for all the secrets and lies over the years. But she took a deep, quivering breath, and tried to zero in on the truth that was finally hers. The fight was painful, excruciating even, but it had to be done. She needed the answers, needed to confront the reality of her family, no matter how much it hurt. For a while silence once again descended, thick and oppressive. Gwen rose to her feet, still crying, and gazed into the courtroom. The people she had known since childhood now appeared remote, as though strangers. She understood that the fight was not only about rage, it was about taking back her voice, claiming her right to hear the truth, and taking the first step toward healing, no matter if that journey was tortured and inexact. Lastly, Gwen faced Kody and Christine again, her eyes blazing but tearing up. I don't know what's next, she breathed, her voice hoarse. But I do know one thing. I need to know who I am. And I need the truth. Everything else can come later, if it even can. The courtroom was quiet, everyone taking their collective breath. The standoff had come to a boiling point, raw, emotional, and unyielding. Gwen's voice had brought her heartache and rage into the daylight, making everyone in the room face the hard reality with her. And in that charged, electric moment, Gwen had a small, delicate spark of strength. The confrontation was not the end. It was the start. The start of knowing, of asking questions, and finally of finding a path to rebuild her life on the truth, however unpalatable that might be. The courtroom had become impossibly silent. Gwen Brown laboriously stood up from her chair, each movement heavy with the burden of the truth she now bore. The judge's gaze was firm on her, patiently waiting, knowing that this testimony would not merely tell truths, it would tell her soul. Gwen took a trembling breath, attempting to calm the tempest brewing within her chest. She walked to the witness stand with shaking legs, her hands on the edges for support. All eyes in the room were on her, some with pity, others with curiosity, and others with barely controlled judgment. Gwen felt naked, as if her whole life was now out there for all to judge. She swallowed, the bitterness of fear and sorrow acutely on her tongue, and gazed straight ahead. Gwen Brown, the judge spoke softly. Please inform the court what you have to say. Her voice trembled at first, nearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, but with hesitation she started, her words heavy with years of repressed anguish. I grew up thinking that I knew who my father was. I trusted him unconditionally. I loved him with all my heart. And now, I feel like that love has been taken away from me. She hesitated, blinking repeatedly to keep tears from flowing. The courtroom waited with bated breath, leaning forward to hear every anguished shaking sentence. Gwen sensed the looks, the anticipation, the unspoken need for precision, and she must provide it. All my memories, they're tainted now, she went on, her voice growing firmer through the tears. Birthdays and holidays and school things and quiet nights, when I thought that my father was speaking to me just to make me feel better. Were those times true? Did he even mean them? Her hands curled over the edge of the stand, knuckles white as she struggled to remain upright. The ache in her voice was audible. The courtroom was filled with the aching tension of loss, heartbreak, and betrayal. Gwen spoke of the myriad little moments, the intangible strands of affection that had bound her to Kody. Each birthday he spent with her, each time he shouted the loudest for her triumphs, each time he dried her tears. They were all now tainted with suspicion. "I don't know who I am anymore," Gwen whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her own vulnerability. "I thought I was his daughter. I thought I had a father who would always protect me, guide me, and love me unconditionally. And now, I don't know anything. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again." She glared in the direction of Kody, her eyes flashing pain, and a wordless question. Why? How could he allow her to live a lifetime of illusions? Kody squirmed in his seat, guilt etched deeply into his face, but remained silent. Gwen's words clung in the air like a storm, heavy and relentless, allowing no space for excuses or explanations. "I've spent years believing in a lie that wasn't even mine," she went on, her voice trembling with emotion. "And now I'm a stranger in my own life. Everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and family, it's all shattered." Tears flowed freely now, and Gwen didn't even try to conceal them. Her body shook with sobs, her chest rising and falling with every word she uttered. But with each tear came also a queer clarity. The agony was agonizing, yes, but genuine, and she was finally telling it out loud, not letting it seethe within her like she had for all those years. Christine's hand hovered over Gwen, wishing to give comfort, but Gwen shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered through her sobs. "I have to say this. I need the world to hear it. I need to hear it myself." Gwen's testimony was not words alone. It was a meeting with the past. She recounted the sleepless nights she had spent agonizing over her family, the silent moments of uncertainty that had occasionally emerged, and the sudden, searing clarity that now filled her life. She talked of the mixed-up feelings she'd had as she struggled to put the father she adored alongside the knowledge that he may not be her father. "My identity is broken," she confessed, her voice cracking. A shattered mirror spread out in 1,000 fragments. "Every one of them reflects someone I thought I was. But now I don't recognize any of them. I don't know who I am. I don't know who I belong. I don't know who to trust." The court was still except for the soft rasp of Gwen's broken breathing. Each individual in that room felt the heft of her words, the seriousness of a life turned inside out by one crushing discovery. Even the judge was moved, letting the testimony have its natural course, providing Gwen with room to speak the hurt she had carried for so long. Gwen's voice, which had shaken and been so fragile, started gaining solidity. She knew that by saying her truth, however painful, she was empowered. With every word that she let out, she broke loose the shackles of confusion and betrayal that had held her captive for so long. "I am better than this secret," she spat, her voice rising. "I am Gwen Brown. I am a person who is worthy of love, honesty, and respect. And even if my family is not who I believed they were, I will create my own truth. I will forge my own way." There was a hush in the courtroom when she finished, the silence heavy with emotion and unspoken recognition. Gwen descended from the stand, still having tears running down her cheeks, but her posture now had a quiet sense of strength. She had confronted the darkest part of her life, and spoken her hurt out loud. Outside the courtroom, she would continue to cry. She would continue to mourn. But in this moment she felt something different. A small struggling spark of courage. The dawn of taking back her life from betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak. Her testimony wasn't only a retelling of pain. It was an affirmation of resilience. A vow to herself that she would not allow herself to be defined by the deceptions of the past. And as Gwen sat back down, the pressure on her chest seemed a little less heavy. She had spoken. She had been heard. And for the first time since the revelation had left her reeling, she started to feel like perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way out. The courtroom descended into a thick, oppressive quiet. All eyes were trained on the judge as he prepared to render the verdict that would change the Brown family's life forever. Gwen was braced in her seat, her fists interlocked in her lap. Her tears had evaporated, leaving streaks of heat on her cheeks, but the tempest raging within her still had not abated. The judge cleared his throat, the sound reverberating through the quiet room. "This court has reviewed all of the evidence brought before us," the judge started, their voice slow and serious. "The DNA report filed is absolute. Gwen Brown's biological father is not the man she has known and addressed as dad her whole life." A unanimous gasp coursed through the courtroom. Faces went white, mouths dropped slightly in shock. Gwen's stomach twisted. She'd known the truth, but hearing it stated formally made it sound irrevocable, final. It was no longer merely a secret or a potentiality. It was fact. Her chest constricted as the judge went on to say, "Although there is no criminal liability, the emotional consequences upon Gwen are indisputable. The court is aware of her right to pursue understanding, closure, and to redefine her relationships in the family as she believes fit." Gwen's eyes went out of focus as she fought to make sense of the words. Closure, understanding, redefine. The words were almost brutally technical, in comparison with the open wound in her heart. She remembered Kody, sitting there silently, shame etched clearly on his face. Christine's hand hung close to Gwen, her fingers shaking slightly as she hesitated whether or not to offer reassurance. Gwen's own hands were clenched tightly, as if physically holding herself together could possibly keep the pain at bay. She recalled all the times she had loved and trusted Kody, the bedtime stories, the celebrations, the laughter ringing through the house. And now the verdict had destroyed that illusion. The man who had been her rock, her mentor and her guardian, was not the man she had believed him to be. The cornerstone of her universe had collapsed, and she found herself moving through a terrain of uncertainty and heartache. The judge leaned forward slightly, their gaze scanning the room. "It is the hope of the court that this recognition of truth provides Gwen the possibility of healing, of finding emotional clarity, and rebuilding trust on her own terms." Gwen's shoulders trembled as the words hit her. Relief was mixed with destruction. Relief that at last the truth was told, inescapable and public, but destruction that the relationship she had held for so long was now irrevocably changed. Her tears came back, hot and immediate, spilling down onto her lap, as she fought to get air beyond the mass in her throat. Kody glanced up for the first time at the verdict, his eyes colliding with Gwen's. He wished to speak, reach out, clarify things, but Gwen turned away. She was unable to confront him yet. Her heart hurt with love and betrayal. At the same time, she knew that the truth, as agonizing as it was the beginning of taking back control over her life. Christine quietly stood beside Gwen, giving her space but also offering silent support. "You're strong, Gwen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know it hurts now, but you'll find your way." Gwen nodded, though the motion felt mechanical. Strength, she realized, was not about pretending the pain wasn't there. Strength was acknowledging it, feeling it, and still moving forward. The courtroom was strained, a thin bubble of raw emotion hanging in the air. Gwen's friends, family members, and even strangers observed as a young woman confronted the toughest possible truth with bravery, albeit the pain was reflected in every shudder, every weep, every clenched fist of her hands. And at last the gavel came down with a crisp, ringing sound to mark the end of the proceedings. The reverberation sailed around the room, like punctuation to Gwen's fractured world. The verdict was in. The truth could not be denied. And even though it was heart-wrenching, Gwen had weathered the storm, at least temporarily. As the crowd slowly eased along, murmuring to each other, Gwen remained seated for a good minute. She gazed at the shiny floor, the reverberation of the gavel, still echoing between her ears, and attempted to calm herself. The roller coaster of emotions over the past few hours drained her, but also somehow gave her strength. She had confronted the unthinkable. She had voiced her pain out loud, and she had been heard. Beyond the courtroom, the world held its breath. Reporters, spectators, and loved ones all struggling to make sense of the revelation. Gwen sensed the weight of their gazes, yet for the first time ever, a small spark of understanding shone through the chaos. The truth was out. The deception had been uncovered. And now, although her heart was shattered, she could finally start mapping her own direction, one that was authentic, self-created, and unencumbered by delusions. Kody hung back, unwilling to move forward. Gwen stood there for an instant, her feelings in knots: love, hurt, anger, confusion. She understood that if forgiveness came, it wouldn't be soon. But she also understood that the ruling, terrible as it was, had provided her with a gift, the chance to learn, to heal, and to choose for herself whom she wanted to have in her life and how. Christine took Gwen's hand, softly guiding her toward the doors of the courthouse. The afternoon sun spilled onto the steps, warm but dazzling, similar to the truth that they now possessed. Gwen took a deep breath, sensing the air fill her lungs. A small reminder that even with heartache, life continued. The court had reached its verdict, and Gwen now had to hand herself over, a future not of deception, but of doing what it takes to accept the truth. The doors of the courtroom swung shut behind Christine and Gwen, the sounds of the verdict still resonating in the highly polished corridors. Outside, sunlight poured down the steps, warm but unforgiving, over a world that now seemed both home and alien. Gwen breathed in deeply, the crisp afternoon air burning her lungs, and attempted to calm the maelstrom of feelings within her. Relief, grief, anger, confusion, all fought in her like surges against a rocky coast. Christine held her hand tightly, a quiet presence amidst the storm. "It's going to be okay, Gwen," she whispered. "We'll face this together." Gwen nodded. But even as she felt the comfort of her mother's touch, she knew healing would not be immediate. The truth, though necessary, had fractured the life she had once known. There was no instant fix, no magic moment that could erase years of deception. Gwen's thoughts drifted back to Kody. She hadn't fought with him in person outside the courthouse yet, and she wasn't sure that she was ready to. The man who had raised her, taught her, and loved her in his own limited fashion, was also responsible for a deep, unshakable grief. The connection she had trusted, the self she had assumed, it was all now up in the air. And yet, Gwen realized that love, even complicated love, did not disappear overnight. She looked over at her mother, who silently wept, tears streaming down her face. Gwen experienced a jolt of sympathy and anger. Christine had made decisions that she wished she hadn't, but her motivation had ever been protective. Gwen knew that the future would depend on forgiveness. Not just for Kody, but for her and her mother, for the years of trust and delusion that had defined her life. As she descended the courthouse steps, the wind on her face cool and refreshing, Gwen finally allowed herself to cry. She didn't care who saw her, who gawked and whispered. Every sob was a letting go, a small splinter of the pain which had wedged itself in her heart breaking loose. The tears weren't only sadness, they were concession of betrayal, sorrow for lost innocence, and a cleansing beginning to reclaiming her life. Gwen understood something crucial. Family is not necessarily about biology. It's about love, trust, loyalty, and the bonds that we choose to cultivate. Kody is not her biological father, but he had raised her, cared for her, and been involved in her life. The connection was messy, imperfect, and hurtful, but it was there. And now Gwen had the authority to choose how she was going to respect that bond, redefine it, or establish boundaries where necessary. Christine squeezed her hand weakly. "You are stronger than you think," she murmured. Gwen could feel that strength inside her, tenuous but certain. For the first time in hours, no, years, she could feel a spark of mastery over her life. She had endured heartbreak and betrayal, and the horror of revelation. Now she could lay out her own road ahead. As they emerged onto the sidewalk, Gwen saw a cluster of reporters hanging around, flashbulbs popping. Ordinarily their scrutiny would have intimidated her, but today it seemed almost distant. She had confronted the very worst, the shattering of her perceived reality, and made it through. The world's eye no longer intimidated her. Instead, it reassured her that her story, her truth counted, and she would tell it her way. Gwen paused, taking a deep breath, and gazed up at the sky. The sun was sharp, as near to blinding as it could be, but it seemed symbolic. A new day, a new beginning. She couldn't erase the past, but she could make the future. She could decide on honesty instead of deception, self-respect instead of hurt, and resilience instead of despair. Regarding Christine, Gwen smiled weakly between tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here, for assisting me, for simply being you." Christine nodded, her own tears sparkling in the sunlight, and they exchanged a gentle, knowing hug. It was imperfect, but authentic. And at that instant, Gwen knew it was sufficient. She walked out of the courthouse. Gwen remembering the long road she had just traveled. The betrayal had been deep, leaving wounds that would eventually heal, but for now still stung. Yet she felt hopeful, hope that truth and love were not mutually exclusive, hope that honesty could be an alternative to illusion, and hope that she could build a life of her own. No longer was she defined by who she believed her father was. Gwen could define herself. And as she breathed deeply once again, Gwen was whispering to herself, "This is my life, my truth, my path." And for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, she believed it. The hurt of yesterday still lingered, but it did not own her anymore. Gwen had weathered the storm, lived, and walked out of it with the strength to start anew. The Brown story was forever changed. But Gwen's story, her life was only just starting. The courtroom exposed betrayal, but it also provided her with a clarity, a perspective, and the fortitude to forge her own identity, her own family, and her own future. And as she emerged into the sun, Gwen Brown moved into the sunlight, not as the victim of a deception, but as a young woman who had reclaimed her truth and found the strength within herself to heal.